She was ridiculed as a midwife with no children, until the widow rancher asked her. Wind came down the mountain hard that evening, slapping dust against the windows and shaking the porch rafters. Jonathan Mercer sat inside, alone as always, repairing a stirrup by lamplight when he heard it. Hooves on stone, fast and wrong for this late in the day. He stood, took his rifle from the wall and opened the door. A woman stood there. Her scarf was gone, ripped away by the wind. A dark bruise marked her cheek. She didn't speak right away, didn't plead. Behind her, a worn wagon leaned into the slope. Inside were two children. One staring at him with wide, silent eyes, the other still a bundle. She met his eyes. Steady. Exhausted. "I can't keep running," she said. Down the trail, a column of dust rose through the canyon. Riders, for maybe more, moving fast. Jonathan looked at her again, then stepped aside. "Get in." She hesitated only a moment, lifting the baby into her arms. The older child followed, small hands clutching a wooden doll. Jonathan closed the door behind them and slid the bolt. He turned off the lamp, stepped to the window. The riders didn't stop at the gate. Two circled toward the barn and wagon. Two came on, slow now, scanning the house. When they reached the porch, Jonathan stepped out before they could dismount. "Evening," one called. His smile was all teeth. "Looking for someone." "You won't find her here," Jonathan said. The man leaned forward in his saddle. "Strange thing to say. This trail ends here," Jonathan said. "And so will your ride." Pause followed. Tense, weighty. "You hiding someone?" "I'm sheltering someone. There's a difference." The rider's hand moved near his hip, but didn't settle. "You sure about this?" "I am." Another long pause. Then the rider gave a tight smile. "We'll be back." Jonathan didn't blink. "You'll find the same answer." They turned slow, kicked up dust on their way out, but he watched their posture. They weren't done. Inside, the woman stood near the stove, not warming herself, watching. "You got a name?" he asked. "Carolyn Hale." "I'm Mercer," he said. "This is my land. You'll be safe here tonight." She didn't look convinced, just looked at her daughters, then at his rifle. "They won't wait long," she said. "I won't either." Outside, the wind roared across the porch and carried the hoofbeats back into silence. But it wasn't over. Not by a long stretch. Jonathan Mercer hadn't spoken a full sentence to another soul in nearly a year. After the cholera came through Willow Creek, taking his wife in the night and his infant before dawn. He buried them both in the meadow below the ridge. 2 stones, 1 name, and silence ever since. That was 10 years ago. Since then, no woman had crossed his porch. No child's laughter echoed off his walls. He ran cattle, fixed fences, and kept to himself. His closest neighbor lived 6 miles west, and Jonathan preferred it that way. The town called him a ghost that never left. He made no effort to correct them. The house he built with his own hands had grown quiet. Not peaceful, just empty. He never repainted the nursery. Never moved his wife's shawl from the chair where she left it. Most nights, he sat in that room, unmoving, as if time would walk backwards if he waited long enough. Some nights he heard her voice. Not real, he knew that. But it came anyway, soft, like she was standing just out of sight, humming the lullaby she never got to finish. He'd grown used to it. Grief became the mortar in his walls, the thing that kept them standing. The townfolk knew better than to stop by. Even Judge Winslow, who ran most everything in Willow Creek, learned not to push. Once, years ago, he'd sent a man up the trail offering to buy Mercer's land. Said it was a waste, all that pasture going unused. Jonathan answered with a rifle barrel and a stare so cold the man rode back without saying goodbye. After that, no one came. Not until last night. He stood now at the same window, watching the trail where the riders had vanished. The woman, Carolyn, had gone quiet once inside. The children had eaten a little, then fallen asleep on the rug, curled against each other like animals gone too long without safety. Jonathan hadn't asked questions. Not yet. He didn't need to. He'd seen that look before, the hunted. The way her eyes moved even in stillness, checking exits, measuring trust. He wondered if she could see it in him, too. The hollow space where something used to live. Upstairs, he heard the creak of a floorboard. Not fear. Just the weight of someone trying not to wake ghosts. His rifle sat on the table. His hands moved over it from memory, checking the chamber, wiping grit from the stock. It had sat unused for years. Until now, he hadn't wanted to pick up a gun again. But there are some things that won't let you stay buried. Her name was Carolyn Hale. She told him in the quiet of morning, seated at his kitchen table while the children dozed by the hearth. A thin line of steam curled from her coffee, untouched. The bruise on her cheek had deepened overnight, dark and sharp against her skin. I was a midwife, she said, trained in cross timbers. It was a poor clinic, but we served 5 towns. Jonathan said nothing. He let the silence carry. 2 months ago, the clinic burned. Everything gone in one night. They blamed me. Said I took money, set the fire, vanished with what little there was. Did you? He asked. Her eyes met his without flinching. No. What about the children? Their mother died in the fire. I pulled them out through the back. No one else came for them. Jonathan nodded once. She continued. At first it was rumors. Then came 3 men riders. First watching, then following. Last night, they fired a shot that nearly hit the girl. And you came here. I didn't know where else to go. Jonathan studied her. She was worn, yes, but something in her posture refused to bend. She wasn't running anymore. She was protecting. They say I shouldn't deliver children, she added, because I've never had my own. Townspeople whispered it, some louder than others. Jonathan looked away. That wound was familiar. Outside, the wind had dropped. The canyon below sat still beneath a pale sky. It would not stay still for long. They'll return, Carolyn said. If not them, then the ones behind them. Judge Winslow, Jonathan replied. Her expression told him she knew the name. He offered me a job once, then heard the rumors and turned on me. He sent a man up here years back, Jonathan said. Offered me his daughter, his land, a legacy. Said grief could be fixed with marriage. And you said no. I didn't say anything. She glanced toward the children, then back at him. Well, I've surely spoiled those plans. He didn't smile, but his voice softened. They weren't plans I ever made. He stood and crossed the room, taking his rifle down from the wall. Did you set the fire? No. Steal from the clinic? No. He checked the chamber, then looked toward the trail beyond the ridge. Then you're not running anymore. From down the slope, hoofbeats began again, closer now. Coming steady. Jonathan let her in without a word. He gave her water, fed the children, watched her hands shake as she reached for the tin cup, then stilled them with quiet strength. After, he took his rifle from the wall and stepped outside. The riders came at dusk. For of them, their coats heavy with trail dust, horses restless. They stopped short of the porch but close enough to speak without shouting. You Mercer? One called. Jonathan stood in the yard, rifle relaxed but ready. That's right. We're looking for a woman. Small wagon. 2 kids. Rode through here. No one like that here, he said. The lead rider smirked. That's so? Jonathan's voice didn't change. And you're not riding past that post. The men shifted in their saddles. One looked to the barn, another toward the house. You harboring someone, mister? I said no one's being looked for here. They stared him down. Then one nodded. We'll be back. Jonathan didn't flinch. You'll find the same welcome. They rode off but not in haste. Not like men retreating. Like men who knew time was on their side. Inside, Carolyn hadn't moved from her place near the hearth. They'll come again, she said. Yes, Jonathan answered. But not alone next time. In town, the story spread. Mercer's got her, they whispered. The midwife, the one from Cross Timbers. By nightfall, Judge Winslow had sent a warning. Keep her and you stand against the law. But no marshal came. No court order. Just rumors. And pressure. A note pinned to the gate. Turn her over before it's too late. Then fire. Jonathan woke one night to flames curling through the livestock pen. He and Carolyn fought it off with buckets, but 2 cattle died. The fence was charred to black stumps. Smoke clung to their clothes for days. They didn't speak of it, but he cleaned his rifle twice that morning. More men started watching from the hills. Distant figures on horseback, dressed in black, never coming close. Just there, marking time. Then came the storm. For nights later, just past midnight. It began with a crash, the back door kicked in. Shouts. Gunfire. Jonathan moved fast. Carolyn was already pulling the children behind the stairs. One man stepped inside, rifle raised, but Jonathan was faster. He fired once, clean. Another burst through the front, then a third. Carolyn, from the shadows, fired the shotgun. One man dropped. A fourth grabbed her by the arm, dragged her toward the porch. Jonathan hesitated. Carolyn blocked his shot. He fired into the ground near the man's feet, startling him. Carolyn wrenched free. Elbow. Grab. Shot. The man fell. And just like that, it was over. For men dead or dying in the yard. Black coats. No badges. Jonathan didn't sleep. At dawn, he saddled his horse and rode to Willow Creek. The church was full. Judge Winslow seated near the front. His daughter beside him. The preacher had just opened his Bible when Jonathan walked in. Every head turned. He didn't speak loudly. "For men came to my house last night," he said. "They tried to take a woman and 2 children. They shot at us." He paused. "One of them wore the badge of your deputy." Winslow didn't blink. Jonathan pulled papers from his coat. Scorched, crumpled, but legible. "She didn't burn the clinic. She didn't steal. These letters prove it. From her former doctor. From people in Cross Timbers. She stayed to help." He looked out at them, at the silence. "I buried my wife and son 10 years ago. I know what lies sound like. And I know the truth when I see it." The room held still. Winslow's daughter stood. She left without a word. The judge stayed seated, jaw clenched. The preacher took the letters. He read them slowly, then closed the book in his hands. "This town listens," he said softly. "And we have heard you." Jonathan nodded once, then turned and left. No one stopped him. No one followed. But the silence in Willow Creek had changed. In the days after the church, something shifted in Willow Creek. The townspeople no longer looked at Jonathan Mercer as a recluse. They looked at him with caution, with curiosity. Some even nodded. But the silence was brittle. Judge Winslow moved quickly. He gathered a few men in the saloon's back room, the kind with closed curtains and hard stares. He didn't rage. He didn't need to. "She ruined everything," he said. "My daughter, my plans for the land. Mercer was supposed to be part of this town's future. Now he shelters a criminal. People are listening to him now," one man muttered. Winslow narrowed his eyes. "Then we remind them who makes the law." He gestured to a man standing by the wall. Mr. Gaunt. Tall, gray coat. Cold eyes. "No history. No questions." "Handle it," Winslow said. "Clean. No attention." Gaunt nodded once. At the ranch, trouble crept like smoke. A rabbit carcass appeared on the porch. Neck snapped, blood soaking the step. Jonathan buried it without comment. Then came the banker with a folder in hand. "There's been some confusion with your deed," he said. "A few signatures missing. We'll need to resurvey the north fence." Jonathan didn't take the paper. "Tell Winslow he's welcome to come himself." The banker left quickly. That night, someone cut the fence. One steer fell into the ravine. Carolyn helped pull it free, but its leg was broken. "They're pressuring you," she said. "They're trying to scare us." "And is it working?" Jonathan looked toward the hills. "It's making me ready." Later that week, torchlight glowed on the ridgeline. 5 men stood watching the house, still as statues. They didn't speak, didn't move. One man raised his torch high, then dropped it into the dirt. The others followed. Then they vanished. Jonathan didn't sleep that night. The warning came not from the hills, but from the judge's own daughter. Anna Winslow rode hard and fast, arriving near midnight. Her hair was loose. Her eyes were wide. "They're coming," she said. "Not just thugs. Killers. My father hired them. He's done waiting." Carolyn stared at her, stunned. Jonathan opened the door wider. "Why are you telling us?" he asked. "Because I read the ledger. I saw where the money went. Public funds meant for the school, the veterans' parcels. All diverted into silent hands." She pulled a folded paper from her coat and handed it to him. "It's all there. Names. Sums. Gaunt is leading them. They'll be here soon." Jonathan unfolded the ledger. Familiar signatures. Blood money. "You'll need more than proof," Anna said. "You'll need to survive the night." They spent that night in preparation. The girls were hidden in the root cellar, wrapped in blankets, with food and water enough for 2 days. Carolyn checked the shotgun twice, then again. Jonathan locked every door, laid iron tools near the windows, loaded cartridges with calm hands. "They won't come loud," he said. "They'll come right." She nodded. "Then we wait wrong." They came at 2 a.m. No torches, no shouting, just the crack of a window and the soft thud of boots. Carolyn fired first, one shot from the back room. A man screamed. Jonathan rolled across the floor and fired through the door. Another fell, rifle clattering. A third reached the stairs. Jonathan stopped him mid-step. Another tried to flee through the kitchen. Carolyn was waiting. The last man dropped his pistol in the yard and ran, shouting. "Tell your buyer," Jonathan called after him. "This land don't change hands that easy." The man disappeared into the dark. Only one figure remained. Gaunt, standing by the gate, untouched. "You made this messy," he said. Jonathan leveled the rifle. Gaunt didn't flinch. "Winslow owns the law, the land. You can't change that." Carolyn stepped onto the porch. "Maybe not," she said, "but we can shine light on it." Gaunt turned without another word and walked into the night. At dawn, they rode into town. Jonathan, Carolyn, and Anna. They brought the ledger, the truth. The preacher met them outside the courthouse. He read every line aloud on the steps. People gathered. Then more. Merchants, clerks, farmers. They listened. The ledger named names. Deputies who took bribes, land agents who altered maps, store owners who'd blackmailed debtors under Winslow's eye. By afternoon, the town had turned. The mayor called a vote. By sunset, Judge Winslow had packed a suitcase and left through the back door of his own house. No one waved. No one watched. That night, Jonathan stood on the porch, rifle leaning against the wall. Carolyn came beside him, arms crossed, her hair lit by moonlight. "Is it over?" she asked. "No," he said, "but it's begun." Inside, the girls laughed. Small, bright sounds. For the first time in years, the wind passed over the house without carrying fear. At first light, Jonathan finished the graves. 5 of them, shallow but straight, the kind you dig for men you didn't ask to kill. The last body was the youngest, barely more than a boy. He tried to run when the bullets started, but fear had tripped him, and mercy had not come fast enough. Jonathan laid a blanket over him just the same. Carolyn watched from the porch, her arm bandaged from a graze. She hadn't spoken much since the fight. The girls had cried that morning, and she'd held them until they slept again. Now her face was blank with exhaustion, but her eyes held steady. They burned the bloodied clothes, washed the porch, repaired the broken stair. There was no celebration, only movement, because stopping meant remembering too much. Jonathan packed his satchel with the ledger and documents Carolyn had carried since Cross Timbers. Anna Winslow rode out just after breakfast. Her face was drawn, her voice quiet, but her resolve was clear. "If we're going to put this to rest," she said, "we have to do it where it started." "Will the town hear it?" Carolyn asked. "They'll have to." So they rode. Willow Creek looked smaller than usual, as if the weight of what it had become made its buildings slump and the dust hang lower in the air. People paused when they saw them. Jonathan Mercer, once the silent man in the hills, now riding into town beside the disgraced judge's daughter and the woman they'd all whispered about. They watched from shop doors and windows, but no one stopped them. Jonathan didn't go to the sheriff's office. He didn't trust who still sat behind that desk. Instead, he tied his horse outside the church and rang the bell. By the second toll, the townsfolk began to gather. Some stepped out of stores. Some came from homes. Others arrived with confusion on their faces and questions in their eyes. Jonathan waited at the front steps. Carolyn stood to his right, Anna to his left. The preacher came out, brushing flour from his sleeves. "You've called them here," he said. "You'd best say why." Jonathan nodded and handed him the ledger. "Read it." The preacher opened the first page. His brow furrowed. As his eyes moved line by line, his expression shifted, from confusion to concern to something close to sorrow. Then he read aloud. Names, amounts, dates. One payment for a forged deed. Another for false charges levied on a widow. 3 entries marked with G. Gaunt. Signatures traced to Judge Winslow. Not once. Dozens of times. The crowd stood still, breaths held like a single shared heartbeat. Then Jonathan spoke. "Men came to my house. 5 of them, paid with money from this book. They weren't there to arrest Carolyn Hale. They came to erase her." He let the words settle. "I buried those 5 yesterday, because the law never came to ask a question, only to silence the truth." Carolyn stepped forward. Her voice was quieter, but no less clear. "They said I ran from a clinic I burned down, that I stole, that I couldn't be trusted. But I stayed behind during that fire to get people out. 2 children survived because of it. And I kept these letters and this ledger so that someday someone would believe me." Anna added her voice last. "My father tried to end this before it reached daylight. He used my name, my place, and our town's trust. But I won't carry his silence any longer. What you've just heard is true." There was a hush, broken only by the shuffle of boots and the quiet sound of someone crying in the back pew. Then the preacher closed the ledger and faced the crowd. "This isn't just sin. It's rot. And it won't be healed by silence." The mayor, standing near the doorway, cleared his throat. "You have proof." Jonathan handed over a second copy of the records. Anna verified the original accounts. "I found the men who came, for are buried on my land." One ran. "The names match." More people arrived. A merchant stepped forward. "Winslow threatened to close my account if I didn't sign something I didn't read. I did. I thought it was nothing." A land agent followed. "He forged signatures for a 1/4 acre by the river. The family never knew it was taken." One by one, voices rose, not loud, but sure. Admissions of guilt, complicity, fear. Until a man near the front stood and said, "What now?" The mayor looked to the preacher. The preacher looked at the people. "Now," the mayor said, "we call it what it is, a crime." He turned to the courthouse. "I'm ordering a public tribunal. No closed doors. No legal tricks. Everyone with a name in that book comes forward." Someone asked, "What if they don't?" Jonathan answered, "Then we go get them." The tribunal began that same afternoon. Chairs were dragged onto the courthouse steps. People crowded the square, spilling onto porches and rooftops. The whole town showed up, not for vengeance, but for truth. Names were read, accounts examined. Men who had once passed judgments were now asked to explain themselves. Some tried to justify, others hung their heads. The deputy who signed off on the first bounty had resigned by nightfall. By dusk, Winslow's power had crumbled. Though he was nowhere to be found, his absence spoke as loudly as guilt. The council stripped his name from town records, voted to nullify every land deal under investigation. The church bell rang not for death, but for cleansing. Anna stayed behind to assist. She worked through records, met with victims, and answered every question plainly. When someone asked how she could turn on her own family, she replied, "You don't bury the truth to save your name. You dig it out to save your soul." When it was over, Jonathan, Carolyn, and the children rode home. The ranch stood quiet, but it no longer felt haunted. The barn was repaired. The fence posts were marked with new chalk lines from the girls' game, a sign that childhood had returned. That evening, Carolyn found Jonathan on the porch, cleaning his rifle. "You didn't say much today," she said. "Didn't need to." "You stood for something," she said. "People followed that." "I stood for you," he replied. She paused, then sat beside him. "They'll remember it, you know," she said. "Even if they don't say it out loud. They don't need to." From inside the house, the children laughed. The sound carried through the windows and into the still air. Jonathan leaned back in his chair. "I forgot what that sounded like. It sounds like home." He looked at her. "It could be." Carolyn reached for his hand. Not with fear or caution, but with the same steady calm she'd used in the clinic, in the hills, and on the day she arrived. Jonathan didn't flinch. "You think there's peace after all this?" she asked. "No," he said, "but there's rest. And that's enough to start with." She nodded. They sat there a while longer, not speaking, just breathing. Outside, the stars began to blink into the sky. And inside, for the first time in 10 years, the house felt full. 2 months passed. Spring gave way to the long light of summer, and the hills around the Mercer Ranch shifted from pale green to golden brown. Corn pushed up in tight rows, the earth firm beneath it. The broken fence had been mended twice over. The barn stood newly painted, the beams scrubbed clean of soot and old blood. And every morning, a new sound rose above the fields, the laughter of children. They chased each other through the orchard, bare feet kicking up dust, ribbons tangled in their hair. The older one, Evelyn, had begun naming the horses. The younger, Ruth, liked to sit on the porch step with a cup of water and hum songs she made up as she went. Carolyn called them her girls. And in time, so did Jonathan. It hadn't come easily. Even after the tribunal and Winslow's quiet flight from the county, there were days when tension lingered like smoke from an old fire. There were nights when Jonathan still slept lightly, one hand near the rifle by the bed. Carolyn had nightmares of her own, the kind that woke her before dawn, breathing hard, gripping the blanket like it might tear in two. She never spoke of them, but Jonathan knew. He'd known grief long enough to recognize its shapes, even in someone else's silence. They worked through it together, not with words always, but with action. They rebuilt the barn as a family. They planted beans and corn, repaired the roof, cleaned out the root cellar and stocked it with dried peaches and glass jars of canned okra. Each task was a kind of thread, slowly stitching new meaning into the walls of a house once built for 2, now alive with 4. One morning, Carolyn stepped onto the porch with a basket of bread in her arms. The sunlight caught her hair, loose over her shoulders. She called out into the field where Jonathan was fixing a post. "Dinner's nearly on," she said. "If you want to eat before the sun goes down." Jonathan straightened up, wiped sweat from his brow, and looked toward her. That voice, he thought, it didn't just call him in, called him back, to something he hadn't dared believe he'd ever feel again. He hung his hammer on the fence rail and walked slowly toward the house, boots kicking up dry soil. By the time he reached the steps, Carolyn had already set the basket down and disappeared inside. The screen door creaked open. The smell of roasted chicken and cornbread filled the space. The girls were setting the table, 2 forks each, 1 too many spoons, a folded napkin perched on top like a crown. Ruth clapped when Jonathan stepped in. "You're late," she said. He smiled, small but real. "I was fixing what you broke," he replied, gently tugging on her braid. "I didn't break anything," she said. "That fence didn't walk open on its own." "Maybe it did," she said. Carolyn laughed from the stove. "Don't encourage her." Jonathan washed his hands and took his place at the table. Carolyn sat across from him. Ruth wriggled into her chair. Evelyn said the blessing, stumbling over words with a seriousness that made Jonathan look down, hide his grin. The meal was simple: chicken, beans, bread, and apples sliced thin. But it was more than food. It was evidence that something broken could be whole again, that silence could be filled with voices, not ghosts. After dinner, Carolyn stepped outside while the girls cleaned up. Jonathan followed. The stars were already bright, scattered across a deep blue sky. They stood in silence for a while. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled something small from his coat. A simple silver band, thin, old, slightly tarnished. "My mother wore this," he said. "Passed it to me after Pa died." Carolyn looked at it, then at him. "I don't know if I remember how to be a husband," he said, "or if I'd even be a good one." She stepped closer. "I'm not asking for perfect," she said. "Just present." He nodded slowly. "This house used to be quiet," he said. "Too quiet. Then you came. You and the girls. And now," he swallowed, "now I can't hear myself think. And I wouldn't trade that for anything." Carolyn's eyes softened. "Then we start with supper," she said. "And after that, we'll see." Jonathan held out the ring. She took it, not fast, not dramatic. Just steady, certain. And that was enough. The next morning, they rode into town. Carolyn with Evelyn and Ruth, dressed in clean cotton dresses and hats slightly too large. Jonathan in his old coat, the rifle left behind for the first time in years. They stopped at the church. The preacher smiled when he saw them. "No sermon today," he said. "But the doors are always open." "Not here for a sermon," Jonathan said. "Here for something quieter." Carolyn nodded. He understood. They didn't want a crowd, just a start. Inside, the preacher lit a single candle. Jonathan took Carolyn's hand. The girls stood beside them, each holding a flower. They didn't speak vows, not formally. But in that stillness, under the gaze of an open window and the rustle of wind, promises were made. To be present, to protect, to begin again. The preacher gave a simple blessing. "May your house be loud with laughter, and your fields full of light." Outside, people watched them pass. Some waved, some simply looked. Not everyone approved, but no one interfered. The town remembered what Jonathan had done, what Carolyn had endured, and what they had built together without permission. Back at the ranch, life settled into rhythm. Ruth learned to milk the goats, though she hated the smell. Evelyn took to books and spent long hours reading in the loft, eyes wide with stories. Carolyn found joy in tending the herb garden she'd started beside the porch. Lavender, mint, thyme. Each one tucked into its own row, carefully labeled in chalk. Jonathan worked the fields but spent more time near the house now. Some nights, he watched the girls sleep before blowing out the lantern. Other times, he simply stood at the edge of the porch, hand resting on the post, listening to the night sounds, the wind in the leaves, the faint creak of the barn. It no longer sounded empty. One day in late August, a rider approached. Not a lawman, not a threat. A young woman, no older than 20, with a letter in hand. She said she'd come from Cross Timbers, that she'd heard of a midwife who was not only skilled, but brave. "I'm expecting," the woman said, "and the local doctor's already booked. They say you saved 2 children during a fire." Carolyn looked at her for a long time, then invited her in. That evening, they sat by lamplight, talking through the pregnancy. Jonathan sat quietly nearby, pretending to read while listening to Carolyn's voice. Patient, calm, sure. After the woman left, he turned to her. "You've got your work back." Carolyn nodded. "But not just the work," he said. "The name, the truth." She met his gaze. It never left. It just needed someone to listen. On the first day of September, Jonathan built a swing in the oak tree behind the house. He tied the rope tight, then called the girls over. Ruth screamed with laughter as she swung. Evelyn pushed her sister higher and higher, shouting warnings that Jonathan pretended not to hear. Carolyn sat on the porch, a hand over her belly, just starting to show. Jonathan watched them all, the tree, the dust, the sun filtering through the leaves, and he felt something settle in him. Not just peace, not just rest, but belonging. The kind that doesn't arrive in grand moments but in small, ordinary ones. The clatter of dishes, the scratch of pen on paper, the sound of children arguing over who gets the last biscuit. Voices, real and living, and all around him,